Your Excellencies, distinguished representatives of international humanitarian organizations, colleagues, on behalf of the delegation of the Russian Federation to the Vienna Negotiations on military security and arms control, and Ambassador at Large of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Rodion Miroshnik, allow me to welcome all of you to the 5th International Teleconference. This time we will talk about the acts of terrorism committed by the armed forces of Ukraine against civilians living in the Kherson region. Today, the event has brought together dozens of representatives from about 80 states from 5 continents. They are politicians, diplomats, public figures, experts, and journalists. We thank them for showing considerable attention to this sensitive issue. Today, they are offered a unique opportunity to get first-hand information about the real situation on the ground in the Kherson region. Unfortunately, international organizations do not talk about it, and the Western mass media do not write about it. As of today, a quarter of all Ukrainian attacks on Russian civil infrastructure is committed in the Kherson region alone. The line of contact goes directly through the region's territory, which allowed the Zelensky's regime to unleash a full-fledged terrorist campaign against civilians. They live within the reach of Ukrainian weapons. Unbearable living conditions are created there. They actively use UAVs and artillery to attack civilian targets. It has become a common practice for Kiev to mine roads in a remote way, and by doing that, they cut off food and medical supplies. Another peculiar feature is the armed forces of Ukraine obstruct the provision of medical assistance to the population, as well as the work of first responders and emergency services. The weapons that are provided to the Kiev regime by NATO and EU countries are used against non-combatants. The fact that the Ukrainian and the Western propaganda try to conceal these crimes committed by the Ukrainian fighters in the Kherson region stresses the need to bring full and reliable information to the attention of international community and relevant humanitarian organizations. The international teleconference will start with remarks by high-ranking keynote speakers who have deep expertise and personal experience on this topic. And as they speak, we kindly ask our audience to turn off their microphones. It will help to provide the best sound quality. And after presentations are made, audience will have an opportunity to make comments or to ask their questions. To do that, you need to use the chat function. Colleagues, the first on our list is the Ambassador at Large of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Rodion Miroshnik. He is the co-organizer of the event, and the delegation is proud to work with him and his team. They are constantly monitoring violations committed by the armed forces of Ukraine of the international humanitarian law committed against civilians. They receive information from the ground in real time. Ambassador Miroshnik pays regular visits to the regions affected by hostilities. The reports of Ambassador Miroshnik that contain verified information about crimes committed by the armed forces of Ukraine are circulated in international organizations like the United Nations and OSCE. And today, Ambassador Miroshnik will present systemic data about crimes committed by the armed forces of Ukraine against civilians living in the Kherson region. Please, Mr. Miroshnik, the floor is yours, the microphone is yours, and the video is yours. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Zhdanova, thank you for giving me the floor, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to open the international teleconference that should provide detailed information about the current situation in the Kherson region. By constitution, the Kherson region is a part of Russia, and it joined our country following the referendum held in September 2022. Then, against the backdrop of the coup d'etat in Kiev and genocide organized by the Kiev regime against Russian-speaking population and Orthodox Christians living on the southeastern part of Ukraine. 87% of residents of the region who participated in the referendum have voted for Ukraine's withdrawal for Kherson region's withdrawal from Ukraine and its accession to the Russian Federation. And then 570,000 residents casted their votes. And that's what has provided irrefutable legal grounds for the residents of the Kherson region to exercise their right to self-determination. The Kiev regime has responded to democratic expression of will with intensified fighting, terrorist acts, and attacks on civilians. In November 2022, Russia had to withdraw its troops from the right bank part of the Kherson region, which was preceded by massive evacuation of the population to the Russian-controlled territory. Today, Russian authorities maintain de facto control over 70% of the constitutional territory of the region, and the remaining part of the region is waiting for its liberation. Today, the line of contact goes along the Dnieper River, and on the coastline on the left bank of the region, there is the largest number of settlements where Ukrainian nationalists are trying to create unbearable living conditions to destroy or to expel civilians. The cities like Kalashki, Gole Pristan, Kakhovka, Nova Kakhovka are separated from Ukrainian advanced positions only by the bed of the Dnieper River and by the coastline, which only makes 2 or 3 kilometers. It means that these towns and cities are within the reach for attacks by almost all kinds of weapons that is used by the armed formations of Kiev, starting from mortars and finishing with missiles and large-range drones. In June alone, at least 6,500 munitions were launched to attack civilian targets. However, we record among these munitions a growing number of long and small-range attack drones targeting civilians. For the relatively short period of its stay in the Russian Federation, the population of the Kherson region faced with a whole range of terrorist acts organized by Kiev. Since Ukraine doesn't have any military prospects to make advances on the battlefield, Zelensky's regime has focused on organizing terrorist pressure on the population, which he recently ostentatiously called his people, but in reality Zelensky authorized their killings, shellings and blockade of the entire cities and towns. Today, at our teleconference, we'll speak about many areas where the Kiev regime is conducting its criminal activities and that should receive a clear and unambiguous international and legal assessment. Since spring 2022, the Kiev regime has unleashed terrorist campaign against representatives of new local authorities, members of election committees and patriotic citizens, organizers of the independent referendum. And without even concealing it, the Zelensky's regime and its henchmen have become masterminds and perpetrators of a whole range of extrajudicial killings, or simply saying political contract killings. For many of these killings, the regime has claimed responsibility openly by making arrogant and bitter statements for their audience. In March 2022, an assistant to the city mayor of Kherson, an activist, Pavel Slobodchikov, was shot in Kherson. In April 2022, blogger Valery Kuleshov was found dead in Kherson. On his body, there were numerous gunshot wounds in his head, body, and hands. In August 2022, Deputy Governor of the Kherson region on agriculture, Alexei Kovalov, was shot, as well as his wife was shot in their own house. In October 2023, in Nova Kakhovka, a car that belonged to a secretary of the local office of the United Russia Party, Vladimir Malov, was exploded. And on the same very day, he died in hospital. In August 2022, there was an assassination attempt against the governor of the Kherson region, Vladimir Salda. According to law enforcement agencies, highly potent chemical agents were used against him. He miraculously survived, and after treatment and rehabilitation, he returned to his work, and today he is with us. The Ukrainian regime has committed a whole range of ecological crimes on the territory of the Kherson region, as well as acts of terrorism against installations containing dangerous forces, which constitutes a violation of significant norms and principles of international humanitarian law. In June 2023, Ukrainian fighters committed a whole range of missile attacks, and they destroyed not only the building of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant, as well as the Kakhovka Dam on the Dnieper River, which released a huge mass of water and flooded 23 settlements in Alashki, Golub-Pristan municipal districts, as well as in Nova Kakhovka urban district. We had to evacuate 10,000 people, but there were casualties among the evacuees. About 60 civilians died and more than 100 ended up in hospital. More than 23,000 private households were flooded. People were left, people lost their houses, their property, and their livelihoods. Moreover, the detonation of the dam has led to severe environmental effects. It destroyed thousands of hectares of fertile lands, and it dried out the Crimean Canal that was a source of fresh water for the Crimean Peninsula with a 2 million population. The Kherson region is a southern and fertile territory, and quite often it has high temperatures during summer. And for Kiev, it has become common criminal practice to regularly set crops and wild grasses ablaze. Ukrainian drones and artillery use incendiary munitions, and they use the hot periods of summer to make sure that the fire would sweep hundreds of hectares of sowings, destroy crops and the agricultural machinery, and so that the fire could spread to the housing that is located nearby. It's a bandit-like way to inflict significant damage to the region's environment, to destroy food products, and to create threats to life of civilians that are surrounded by fire and smoke. The war has changed recently. The West sends to Kiev more and more advanced means of remote warfare in the form of attack drones of various types and modifications. They are used at a large scale, and they apply new tactics of killings, and they create unbearable living conditions for civilians. Quite recently, Ursula von der Leyen has proudly stated that more than 4 billion euros were sent to the Kiev regime to buy drones. In the Kherson region, banderites use drones to block transportation link for settlements. Ukraine deploys landmines daily and constantly attacks transport. It obstructs food and medical supplies, obstructs the evacuation of sick and wounded individuals. The public transportation has become a dangerous means of movement due to the active use of drones. That's how the road looks like that connects Golub-Pristan and Aloshki settlements. This road is constantly patrolled by Ukrainian drones, and it has turned into the road of death. The sides of the road are full of burnt car frames, and the road itself is mined remotely. And transportation and regular citizens hit landmines quite often. This, you see a person that hit a landmine. I saw him last week, and he tried to bring food to Alashki for citizens who still continue to live there. Just listen what he's talking about and what has happened to him. We delivered products and humanitarian assistance to Alashki, and last time when we went there, Ukrainians planted new landmines there, and these mines have rods. They are like American mines, and they are activated by movement. Earlier, they were regular magnetic landmines, and these are the new ones. They use rods. You're 10 meters away from it, and the landmine is activated. And that's what happened to us. We hit the landmine. We saw them for the first time. They look like umbrellas. My companion wore body armor, but yet it was killed as a result of the blast. I was further away from the landmine, and I was hit with fragments. A woman was running towards us, and we shouted to her, "Don't run," because there were landmines there, and the landmines detonated near her. I don't know what happened to her because I was taken to the hospital. That's all I know. I'm confident that at our today's teleconference, local residents will tell us about the atmosphere that is created by Ukrainian fighters with regular attacks and airstrikes, so that it would become more understandable for the respectable international audience. You know, for me personally, a tragedy that happened on May 1st, 2025 was quite telling. For several hours, Ukrainian drones were flying over the city market in Aloshki. They attacked each and everyone who tried to leave the market. As the result of that heinous Nazi act, 8 civilians were killed and 19 were injured. This case is no different to airstrikes committed by German Nazis during the World War II. The same style of attack, the same approaches are used. I kindly ask the governor of the Kherson region, Vladimir Salda, for attending our teleconference. This week, he reported twice about the region-wide blackout in the Kherson region. I know that as of today, residents of Kherson have no power supply in their homes. The armed forces of Ukraine deliberately attack energy infrastructure every day. They know that by carrying out these attacks, they won't affect military capabilities of Russia, but they pursue another goal. They want to create unbearable living conditions for civilians, which also constitutes a violation of Geneva Conventions. And they are trying to extend all the problems of war and military activities to civilians. According to local authorities, about 11,000 private households and apartment blocks were damaged or destroyed as a result of attacks carried out by the armed forces of Ukraine. And it happened not as a result of hostilities that engulfed the entire region. It resulted from targeted and deliberate strikes committed by the armed formations of Kiev against civilian targets. Ukrainian fighters, by taking such actions, are trying to expel, destroy, or at least to intimidate civilians of the region. They're trying to affect the morale of the people and their belief in Russia's ability to attain victory and goals of the special military operation. Over the past month, it has become clear that Kiev doesn't have any opportunity to attain victory on the battlefield and has opted for terrorist warfare. Kiev uses prohibited means and ways of warfare. They're trying to stage victories, and they attack buses and civilian cars instead of tanks. They attack residential houses and hospitals instead of dugouts and fortifications. I would like to point out that the Western sponsors of the Kiev regime do not make any distinction when the Russian territories are attacked. They justify any methods that they believe will help to weaken Russia. They do not see any problems with Ukraine prosecuting population for speaking Russian as a native language or for their devotion to Orthodox Christianity. They are ready to turn a blind eye to the killings of civilians and to the destruction of civilian infrastructure when the Russian population and Russian infrastructure are attacked. I believe that's one of the significant war crimes committed by representatives of Western states when they first block messages and then attempts to carry out an investigation into crimes committed by the Kiev regime. They put efforts on making up baseless accusations against Russia to impose illegal sanctions against our country and to fund the continuation of war. In this regard, I would like to express my appreciation to everyone who attends our international teleconference and who demonstrates their impartiality, their true interest and desire to follow the norms of the international humanitarian law. I wish all of us fruitful work and thank you for your attention. Colleagues, we thank the ambassador at large. Now we go to the Kherson region of the Russian Federation. Now I give the floor to Vladimir Salda, governor of the Kherson region.
Mr. Saldo is a statesman with a rich biography whose activities is inextricably linked to the Kherson region. For dozens of years and throughout the special military operations, Mr. Saldo has lived through provocations, assassination attempts, and threats from enemies and ill-wishers, his close associates. The loss of friends and his close associates. He's gone through rehabilitation in hospitals, but one thing has stayed the same: his loyalty to his work and people, to the benefit of whom Mr. Saldo is working under very difficult circumstances each and every day. Mr. Governor, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of the diplomatic corps, colleagues, reporters. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to firsthand share with you the information about the situation in the Kherson region and what is happening there on the daily basis. We are living in a southern region bordering two seas. Our total area is large and the conditions are very good for growing different types of agricultural plants. But at the same time, for the fourth year in a row, we are experiencing a constant terror, shelling attacks, information pressure on our residents, and behind every report about shelling and destruction, there is a human face. And we're talking about the tragedy of peaceful civilians. Each and every day, they face this military threat, losing their relatives and loved ones, their property, their homes. But at the same time, they continue to live in this region, and they hope that the Russian army will emerge victorious, and they are hoping they can live in peaceful times again. At the same time, I'd like to say that everything that is happening, the whole destruction, all the attacks, are making us stronger. We continue to develop even under the circumstances of a constant military pressure. We see a complicated situation along the whole line of contact, along the Dnieper River. It has an effect on the whole region. Now, the Kiev regime's attacks are going deeper inland. The enemy has systematically used artillery, UAVs of different specifications, other means of destruction. One thing that people cannot wrap their heads around is that the Kiev regime is mining the roads used by the medics used for delivering food. The roads that are used by the locals under the constant threat are people's homes and everything that is linked with them. Yesterday, a strike was launched on two ambulances and on the medical station. What was the rationale behind those strikes? Mr. Miroshnik said that the only reason is to intimidate the locals and to make people's lives harder. During the first half of 2026, as the result of the AFU aggression, 545 civilians have been killed, 3,720 people were injured. 109 miners have been injured. including 20 kids. Maybe people wouldn't believe if we were talking about any other region, but that's what's happening when I visit hospitals where medics are treating the injured. I see the following: medics extract chips from Ukrainian drones from the bodies that are used by the Starlink system to attack civilians that are driving their motorcycles, walking somewhere on foot, or driving their cars. This is happening on the daily basis. The Kiev regime attacks settlements, shops, hospitals, residential yards, attacks people with children, families with children, but it's vacation time now for kids. They should be resting, having fun, but no one even goes swimming because they are afraid that the enemy will use UAVs, unmanned motorboats, to attack the civilians. The deceased include medics, 6 medics and 20 healthcare professionals have been injured. They gave an oath when they were studying medicine, but they now don't have an opportunity to exercise their occupation. We see a hunt for reporters and for medics, and this is the harshest crime because medics help the people who find themselves in a very difficult situation, in a serious condition. They experience it themselves, and journalists are telling truth to the public. So everyone is under threat. The main difficult situation we see in the town of Aloshki. It is situated on the road that links the right and the left bank of the river. It is the road of federal significance that leads to the city of Kherson. The Kiev propaganda is saying that people don't have an opportunity to get evacuated, but it's the only aim of this propaganda is to deceive people. The enemy on the daily basis is mining all the access roads to the town of Veloshka. Our servicemen are demining these roads, but the enemy continues to mine these roads over and over again. But we are not giving up. People continue to live in this town. Someone, of course, abandons this town, but others stay. But some people don't want to leave, even if there's no power, no gas, even if there is no chance to get regular deliveries of food, and when there are no utilities, public utilities that can be used by the locals. In the town of Veloshka, there is a hospital which serves as a hub for providing medical aid to everyone residing in this town, so everyone can get water, medical aid in this medical facility. People can also get a shelter there. They can hide from the drones that are always hovering above their heads. Since the beginning of the year, the hospital has experienced many strikes and 20 ambulances have been damaged. It is difficult to evacuate people from front-line communities. It has become a very challenging task. It runs counter to all the norms of warfare. But I think it doesn't make any sense to continue talking about it because there are no principles on the side of Ukraine that are exercised during this warfare. First responders, emergency workers, the authorities are doing everything to provide necessary medical help. You can see in these photographs what kind of strikes our ambulances experiences. At the same time, Ukrainian militants have lost their human face. Instead, they're saying that these ambulances are used by our servicemen. Recently, neurosurgeon Mr. Kostin has died. Mr. Karlan was severely injured. His wife died. In December 2025, food service unit was damaged. 3 people of this unit died, but the hospital continues to operate. Of course, hats off to our medical personnel who, under these unbearable circumstances, feeling this moral and psychological pressure, continue to perform their duty because this occupation is their life and they're granting life to everyone who's suffering from these strikes. The enemy strives to deprive the Kherson region of power and the neighboring regions as well. Region-wide power outages have become systematic. We do not have any power because now energy workers are trying to restore power to homes. At the same time, UAVs of the Kiev regime are hunting for energy workers that are repairing power lines, doing everything to restore energy to local residents. Power outages lead to environmental catastrophe, disaster, because people lose access to telecommunications, water, gas, everything that people need to continue their daily lives. Of course, hospitals have reserve energy sources. We have stockpiles of food, equipment. We have created the environment to help our repair teams to continue their maintenance works. They're true heroes. Now the enemy has started to demolish bridges, of which there are 60 in our region. Of course, these bridges serve as links, as land corridors to Crimea, to the rest of Russia. Their aim is to isolate Crimea and the Kherson region along with it. Despite this, we see growing resistance to UAVs. We are rebuilding our bridges, and the movement is ongoing, even under the threat of continuing attacks. Transportation links continue to work, and the road of life continues to serve its function. The enemy will not succeed in its task, in its goal, and we will continue transporting cargo from Crimea and to the rest of Russia. We are strengthening our air defense systems. We see dozens, hundreds of UAVs that are hunting for civilian passenger cars, like birds of prey. The Kiev regime is using technological assistance of Western countries. Now it is hard at work creating weapons of mass destruction. If you look at the number of UAVs hovering in the sky, you can consider it to be a weapon of mass destruction. Strikes on gas stations leads to deficit in fuel provision, to bigger prices. Fuel means life. It's an opportunity to deliver commodities. The harvest region is now ongoing, and we have large harvest in the Kherson region, but the Kiev regime drops munitions on ripe fields, setting them on fire like the Nazi troops did during World War II. UAVs are attacking farm equipment, vehicles transporting grain. In the last month, 6 fire engines have been rendered inoperable, and these attacks go on. Those who train Kiev militants to deal with UAVs inspire them to continue their killings and to destroying any targets whatsoever. They do not make any distinction between a child, a military personal carrier. They hunt for everyone and everything. Repetitive strikes are being launched on maintenance crews. The day before yesterday, an equipment vehicle was put on fire when the workers were trying to repair power lines. International media outlets should realize the true situation in the Kherson region. Please come and visit. I'll show you around and you'll see what's happening. The most harrowing strike, and all strikes are harrowing, but the most barbaric, harrowing strike that one can only compare to the tragedy of Katyn when the Nazi troops set people on fire in Belarus, happened on January 1st, on New Year's Eve. It took place in a cafe where people celebrated New Year's Eve. The Kiev regime burned this cafe using UAVs, like they did in the city of Odessa in 2014. 33 people died on the spot. They were burned to the ground, including 4 children. 29 people were injured. For a small settlement is a devastating tragedy. Each family perceived this tragedy. The settlement of Korli became the most heinous example of the crimes of the Kiev regime, but everyone looked the other way. They got away with this crime, even when our diplomats tried to communicate the details of this tragedy within the UN. I'm asked often, what's happening in my hometown, the city of Kherson, on the right bank of the Dnieper River? It was built by regular people, and regular people live there, but it is suffering daily. It is our people who live on the right bank in the city of Kherson. It is our compatriots. They conduct forceful conscription there. They treat people like cannon fodder. They take and grab everyone and send them to the front lines. They detain males in transportation, on the street, in their apartments. For the Kiev regime, the city of Kherson is a military springboard. They construct military bunkers in the basements of schools where they establish command posts. They set up mortars on the rooftops of the schools. So they have turned the whole region into a military base, and they create all the conditions to make people leave the region as soon as possible. At the same time, despite the constant military threat on the left bank of the Dnieper River, we continue our work. We continue to restore the region. We have a program of economic development approved by President and the government of the Russian Federation. We allocate a lot of funds to the regional budget. We continue to develop agriculture. We deliver medicines, food stocks, create conditions for peaceful existence of our citizens. The Kherson region continues to survive thanks to a large extent to our courageous people. I'd like to address all diplomats, reporters, listening to my speech. Please take into account everything I have communicated to you. This threat can be propagated to other countries. You just have to look at the measures taken by the head of the Kiev regime, doing everything to demonstrate to his neighbors in the West that they are so strong so that they can dictate their will to everyone, not only in the East, where Russia is located, but also in the West. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir Vasilyevich. Our next high-ranking speaker is the Commissioner for Human Rights in the Russian Federation, Yana Valerievna Lontratova. Throughout her entire professional career, she has consistently worked in the field of human rights protection and human rights activities, including support for participants in the special military operation and their families. She knows firsthand what is happening in Donbass and Novorossiya. And in the context of the crimes of FAU against Donbass, she initiated a set of measures to accommodate refugees, and she appealed to UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk and UN Secretary General Special Representative Vanessa Frizzi, requesting an immediate response to the barbaric attacks on civilians and ensuring an international legal assessment of what happened. You have the floor, dear colleagues. For the residents of Donbass and Novorossiya, the military conflict did not start in 2022. It has begun ongoing since 2014. For 12 years now, people have lived under shelling, losing loved ones, homes, schools, and hospitals. All these years, Ukraine has consistently accused Russia of violating international norms and human rights, but the logic is absolutely hypocritical, because instead of international law based on UN Charter, they are trying to impose upon us a so-called rule-based order. But these rules are not universal in nature. They are highly selective. The Kiev regime is given an indulgence for any crimes. The Kiev neo-Nazi regime regularly violates any basic humanitarian norms. Therefore, it is important for us to show a world at large in the universal language of international law how Ukraine treats, in fact, international norms, how it treats civilians, children, those who do not hold weapons and simply want to live. I first came to Donbass back in 2014. At that time, I managed to evacuate 2.7 thousand mothers and children from under shell, including 128 wounded and sick children. I saw the crime of Kiev regime with my own eyes. I saw how Ukrainian army turns people into human shields, how neo-Nazis steal children to break out of encirclement and then abandon them. I will never forget those trolleys and prams where children were left completely alone. Since 2014, over 40,000 civilians have suffered due to the criminal actions of the Ukrainian regime. 12,000 of them have died. And what do representatives of Kiev say? Here's a statement by Ukraine Permanent Representative Andrei Melnik at the UN Secretary Council meeting on June 8. I quote, "We have already seen the fabricated myth about the 2014 tragedy in Odessa Trade Union House, or the cynical tales about the supposedly people of Donbass who suffered from the actions of the Ukrainian armed forces. They call people bone alive fabricated myths. He called the residents of Donbass who have lived under Ukrainian bombing and shelling for 12 years, supposedly people. For Kiev, they are imaginary so-called people. As the head of office of the President of Ukraine, Mr. Yermak, said in 2023, this is a biological trash of the world. This is not just a harsh political phrase. This is dehumanization. They clearly divide people into first and second class or sort, who has the right to live and who does not. This rhetoric is a continuation of Nazi ideology. In February 1942, Joseph Goebbels wrote about Russians. They are not a people, they are a herd of animals. Current Ukrainian leaders are practically quoting the Nazis. Today, the Kherson region is suffering particularly heavily. It accounts for above a quarter of Ukrainian strikes on our civilians' infrastructure facilities. They strike Kherson region with particular cruelty. I've been there many times. The position is vividly reflected in the phrase of Podolyak, an advisor to the head of the President office. For me, it's fundamental that we liberate and strictly regarding collaborators and Russian military personnel the Kherson region. That is not up for the discussion, and for the word Russian to be completely forgotten in the Kherson region. Please know they are talking about physically gone. That is why it's clear why they are trying to destroy schools, ambulances, buses, residential buildings, and life support facilities. Ukraine has ratified the Geneva Convention and all additional protocols to this. These are the fundamental foundation that define the rules and laws of modern warfare. The norms state people who do not participate in hostilities must be treated humanly. Their life and physical integrity must not be violated. They must not be killed, maimed, tortured, or abused. But what do we see in practice? On May 31st, 2026, a Ukrainian drone attacked residential multi-store buildings in Genichevsk. 48 apartments were damaged. 11 people were injured. And the most terrible thing, a 6-year-old child died. The area where the houses were located is densely populated. There were no military facilities nearby. This crime was committed a week after the terrible tragedy in Starobelsk, when on May 22nd, a college where 86 teenagers were studying and sleeping in the age of from 14 to 21 were attacked by the 16 drones. And the children were trying to escape, and the drones attacked them. I was there personally after the tragedy. With the help of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I brought 50 international journalists from many countries. It was very important because at the UN Security Council, it was mentioned that objective journalists have never seen this. So we brought many journalists from United States, Great Britain, China, Arabic countries, and other countries, and they see it with their own eyes that there were no military facilities, only personal belongings of the children, their toys, and blood-covered blankets. The rescue operation lasted 45 hours. It was halted about 18 times due to the new strikes. I, as a human rights activist, I never forget the tears of the rescue team who didn't have any possibility to recover the children. Next, on 2021, the UN Security Council adopted a resolution on the protection of education in armed conflict. Among the co-authors was, among others, Ukraine and Denmark and other countries. The resolution explicitly states that it's inadmissible of attacks on school children and teachers, but what do we see in practice? A destroyed college in Starobilsk, where 21 children died in April 2022. School number 7 was shelled in Yasinovate. They were the authors of this resolution, but when it comes to the dead children in Starobilsk or strikes on schools in Donbass, Zaporozhye, and the Crimea, they are silent. This is a policy of double standards. Moreover, let's return, and they call this event, Mr. Melnik called it as incidents. What can be called as incidents? The death of children, the loss of children by their parents. And Denmark just said at the UN Security Council meeting, we are not in shame, and it's true. Let's return to Geneva Convention, Article 59 of the first additional protocol prohibits attacking undefended localities or facilities by any means whatsoever. But on May 28, 2026, Kiev staged a bloody provocation in Kherson to overshadow the outrage following the tragedy in Starobilsk. They hit the playground. A man died, his wife and 2 children were injured. On the same day, drone strikes and damaged an administrative building and trade pavilions in Veliki Kopani, residential buildings in Malo Lepechka, Nova Mayachka, Redensk, Tavrisk, and Vinogradovka passenger car, a non-operational building of a boarding house in Zhelezny Port. So we can enumerate a lot of this. This is a systematic tactic of terror against the civilian population. They strike civilians with such ease because they do not consider them human. They strike buses, cars, and so on. Here's a phrase from one of the Ukraine's leaders. These are people with altered psyches who must be brought to fair responsibility. Fair responsibility, in our understanding, is only physical elimination. These words, dear colleagues, demonstrate the essence of Kiev's policy. Article 35 of the first additional protocol to the Geneva Convention prohibits use of weapons, projectiles, substances, and methods of warfare that are capable of causing superfluous injury or unnecessary suffering. Meanwhile, on New Year's Eve from 2025 to 2026, Ukrainian militants deliberately struck a cafe and hotel on the Black Sea coast in Horly with drones. As a result of the strike, dozens of people died, including a child. Many other civilians were injured. Many were burned alive. One of the drones contained an incendiary mixture. The Ukrainian armed forces deliberately burned people. The Article 15 of the first additional protocol states that civilian medical personnel shall be respected and protected. But on June 26, 2026, as a result of terrorist attack on an ambulance, a woman, a paramedic, was killed. The driver of the vehicle was severely injured and is in serious condition. This is and cannot be no justification for the shelling of medical personnel. This is an obvious war crime. I would like to enumerate a number of cars destroyed and medics died. On June 13, 2026, a Ukrainian drone destroyed a vehicle that functions as a mobile paramedic and obstetric station. At the time, the vehicle was in a hangar next to the Hornostaevska Central District Hospital. They are striking those who should be saving people. the doctors. And we should note also the Article 37 of the first additional protocol to the Geneva Convention deserves special attention, the prohibition of perfidy. International humanitarian law prohibits killing, injuring, and capturing an adversary by resorting to perfidy. This includes simulating an intent to negotiate under a flag of truce or simulating surrender or capitulation. Russia declared a truce from May 8, which Ukraine violated almost immediately. From May 9 to 12, the Kiev regime continued to strike the Kherson region despite the three-day holiday truce. As a result of the militant aggression, 2 people died and 8 civilians were injured. Attacks occurred in several settlements in the region. Aleshki came under attack. There, a Ukrainian drone attacked workers who were cleaning the territory. As a result of the attack, 6 civilians were injured. One of the wounded died in intensive care. This is Kiev's real attitude towards any humanitarian agreements. In words, international law; in practice, what? Strikes on peaceful civilians even during an announced truce. The Kiev regime is constantly expanding its list of crimes. Article 53 of Additional Protocol 1 to Geneva Convention prohibits any hostile acts against historic monuments, places of worship, and objects constituting the cultural and spiritual heritage of people. But what do we see in reality? In June of this year, Ukraine struck with Kiev Pechersk-Lavra with a Patriot missile, possibly due to the expiration date. This is a strike on one of the most important Orthodox monasteries. The Lavra is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and at the same time, Ukrainian side accuses us of carrying out the strike. But this is a fake. The Kiev authorities have been systematically destroying the Lavra for years now. They seized the priest. Back in August 2023, the monastery was stormed. Monks and pilgrims were effectively driven out of the monastery territory. The Kiev Pechersk-Lavra Metropolitan Pavel was arrested and brought to trial as a dangerous criminal. This is a consistent state policy of pressure on the Russian Orthodox Church. On June 10, a Ukrainian drone attacked the Panorama Museum defense of Sebastopol. This is one of the main symbols of Sebastopol's heroic history and a cultural heritage site. The attack resulted in a large-scale fire. Are the soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine limited to violating the Geneva Convention? No. They go further and violated the Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted by UN General Assembly. Article 5 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights prohibits torture, cruel and inhuman and degrading treatment and punishment. Our Institute of the Ombudsman for Human Rights has evidence of how the armed forces of Ukraine systematically torture people. On this slide is a brand in the stage of Trident. This item is in our office. We brought it from the Kursk region. Our institute has evidence that servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine used this brand as an instrument of torture against civilians. They put it on the skin of our citizens. This is a direct reproduction of Nazi practices from the time of the Great Patriotic War, when a brand in the shape of swastika was burned onto the bodies of Soviet soldiers. Here's another item, a drill bit. It used to drill into the knees of priests. One woman, Alexandra Veryaboda, told how she was beaten with the drill bit on the back of her knees until she fell. They would pour ice water over her and force her to get up again. Another captivity, it took her a long time to learn to walk again. Another terrible example, shackles. They were passed on from the so-called Mariupol library. Was the name of a secret prison. I ask why library? Because interrogation they were called Rodion. Dear colleagues, our office systematically records and collects evidence of crimes committed by the Kiev regime, including facts of violation of international humanitarian law. We send these materials to the United Nations, OSCE, or other structures and organizations. So far, we have received a response only regarding the incident of the strikes in Starabilis. The UN Office of the High Commissioner asked us to provide materials regarding the strikes on the college. We are preparing all the evidence and we send it in the near future. Dear colleagues, I urge you to carefully study the presented evidence and give these events an honest, fair, and objective assessment. We believe that it is impossible to ignore the facts of violation of international norms, and I speak it as a human rights activist. Thank you for your attention.
Вас не слышно.
The interpreters do not receive the sound.
Благодарю, коллеги.
Thank you, colleagues. We thank Madam Lantratova for her report, and we fully support the idea that the violation of international norms, human rights norms, cannot be ignored. That's why we have gathered here today. Colleagues, one of the important topics in our agenda is the military and political situation in the Kherson region. Our next speaker is Mikhail Zvinchuk, is next on our list of speakers. He is a military blogger and head of the Russian Military Analytical Center Rybar, which has 1.5 million subscribers from all over the world. The materials of the Rybar Center have a high quality of analysis, and they draw on verified information. Mr. Zvinchuk, the floor is yours.
Okay, hello, dear colleagues. My name is Mikhail Zinchuk, and I'm head of Russian Rybar think tank. And I would like to speak my part about current war. Any war is first and foremost about the fates of the people who find themselves on the firing line. Civilians pay the highest price. They lose their homes, their loved ones, their future. Yet the global media rarely shows the full picture. They choose whom to sympathize with, whose pain to broadcast in prime time. This is not accidental, but a consistent practice. We saw it in the Balkans, where casualties among the Serbian population were hushed up, and in the Middle East, where the suffering of people on one side of the front becomes a news hit, while on the other side, it is at best mentioned in passing. Today, the same scenario is playing out on the lands of the former Ukraine. The largest Western media outlets have created a picture in which there is a room only for tragedies in the territories controlled by the Kiev authorities. At the same time, in the former Ukrainian territories, people die every day from Ukrainian shelling, yet this is either ignored by these media or, in certain cases, is even presented as almost Russian self-shelling. One of such regions is Kherson, which became part of Russia in September 2022. Let's take, for example, this year, 2026. From the very first day of the year, residents of the Kherson region were already dying. On January the 1st, Ukrainian UAV drones struck a cafe in the village of Horle, where locals were celebrating the new year. 29 people were killed and more than 50 were wounded. Many of those killed were burnt alive. Among the victims were 2 children. Had this happened in a territory controlled by Ukraine in 2022, it would have been in all the headlines of the world's media with right interpretation. Instead, global media chose to use the absurd Ukrainian version, claiming that the cafe in Horley was a military target. Another example is Ukrainian strike on ambulances, when medics are hunted intentionally. For instance, in Alyoshki, in second half of 2025 alone, 10 vehicles were burned by drones, providing help to the residents who remained in the towns because of impossible exit. The scale of artillery strike is enormous. This scale on Kherson region is most clearly conveyed by the figures. In the last 6 months alone, more than 4,000 artillery strikes were reported in the region, and the number of drone attacks is so large that it practically defies precise counting. Behind every incoming round lies a destroyed home, a burnt out car, other destroyed property, or a mutilated life. The settlements along the Dnipro River suffer the most from the shelling. For example, in Alyoshki, over 6 months, there were only 21 days on which no artillery munitions hit the town. Not a single day passes without drone strikes. But it's not only the settlements along the Dnipro River that are subjected to strikes by Ukrainian UAV, drones, or artillery, or other munitions. You need only to look at the map on the towns and villages of Kherson region. In the first half of 2022, in Veliki Kopani, for instance, dozens of kilometers from the front line, the number of civilian dead and wounded is roughly comparable to that in Alyoshki, which lies on the shoreline. The picture becomes even clearer when one considers that single shell or single drone strikes are rare attacks typically involve dozens of munitions. At the same time, only the notable settlements are counted, whereas the highways come under fire as well. The any target is a military one. Faced with such figures, someone might ask sarcastically how many of these Ukrainian strikes were aimed at facilities housing Russian troops. Of course, their presence in a frontline region would be foolish to deny, but indirect answer can be found in civilian casualty statistics. Over 6 months, 123 residents were killed and 455 were injured as a result of Ukrainian action in Kherson region. Considering the currently low population density in major settlements near Dnipro River, these numbers are too grim. Most civilians were killed by drones, 85 people, while others died from anti-personnel mines and improvised explosive devices dropped by Ukrainian helicopter drones, including, for example, Baba Yaga UAV drones. They dropped them on rear roads. But the most horrifying part is the statistic on the circumstances of civilian deaths. Half were killed by deliberate strikes in which the victims were not inside buildings or vehicles, where mistakenly identification is possible. But they were killed out in the open, where Ukrainian drone operators could clearly see whom they were hitting. This vividly demonstrates that toward what are supposedly their own former citizens, the Ukrainian armed forces profess the principle any target there is a military one, any resident there is an enemy. Behind every such incident lies a blow to someone's life. And very often, these turn out to be the people least prepared for it. If you look at the breakdown by age of the dead and wounded, almost a third are elderly people over 60 years old. Moreover, official reports do not always indicate the age of the civilians killed or wounded, so the percentage of the elderly among them may be even higher. Often they cannot leave the constantly shelled settlements on their own, and their evacuation by social services and servicemen is hindered by the high level of drone activity. In addition, some simply do not want to leave their homes, being reluctant to go off into the unknown in old age. Among the victims of Ukrainian strikes on Kherson region, there are children as well. The overall trend in the number of civilian dead and wounded remains practically unchanged, amounting to about 100 year per month. So, given these figures and data, a question may arise. Who exactly is behind the strikes on the residents of Russian Kherson region? These individuals and units are well known, and not only thanks to intelligence report, but also because of their own activity in media sphere. They release their strikes on the region and post them in public. In keeping with the principle, everyone who lives on the other side of the front is an enemy, even if they are former Ukrainian citizens. The drone terror on the left bank of Kherson region has a clear organizational structure. A key role is played by units of the Ukrainian armed forces. For example, unmanned systems forces. The 414 Separate Brigade, Magyar Birds, the 427 Separate Brigade Rarok, the 20th Separate Brigade K2, as well as 383 Separate Brigade, and the 426 Marine Corps Unmanned System Regiment. The operations are built on the principle of total destruction, burning cars, killing people, and severing logistics chains. That is how the operators themselves describe the results of their activity. The artillery component of terror is provided by the 406th Separate Artillery Brigade, which conducts chaotic shelling on the settlements on the left bank of Dnieper River. And units of 34th, 35th, 36th, and 38th Marine Corps brigades of Ukrainian armed forces shell the left bank with mortars and other weapons. As a result, the civilians of Oleshki, Kakhovka, and Gornostaevka come under fire from kamikaze drones, artillery, and mortars every day. The Ukrainian units act in a single coordinated effort, turning the frontline zone into a total kill zone. The question may arise, how can such massive strikes on Kherson region be carried out by a country that for the most part lacks the production capacity to independently manufacture the electronics, fuel, and other components of such weapons? And that certainly has no economic means to do so. The answer is European financial aid. For example, of the 90 billion euros in loans for the coming years, roughly two-thirds is intended for arms purchases, particularly unmanned systems. Another factor is direct military aid financed by Europe. One element of it has been the long-range Hornet drones made by SwiftBeat, a company owned by former Google CEO Eric Schmidt. Since 2026, the Ukrainian armed forces have been using them to attack highways in the new Russian region, including Kherson region. In the last few months alone, more than 30 incidents of these drones striking civilian vehicles on the region roads have been documented. Ukrainian authorities openly state that the primary purpose of Hornet drones is to disrupt food and fuel logistics in these regions. This is why any civilian trucks, buses, tankers carrying fuel are absolutely deliberately chosen by Ukrainian UAV operators as the primary target of attacks by these American-made drones. However, the attacks are not limited to highways and Hornet drones. The Ukrainian armed forces are actively striking the energy and transport infrastructure of Kherson region with drones such as Loti, the FP-1 or FP-2, and other systems built with European money and using German engines, American navigation models, and other Western products. In particular, over 6 months, 9 strikes were reported on the bridges near Chongar and Genichevsk that link Kherson region with Crimea. 3 more strikes were carried out on the bridges between Kalanchak and Crimean town of Armyansk. The goal of these strikes remains the same: to isolate the region from supplies of fuel, food, and other goods. A huge role in the Ukrainian drone strikes on the infrastructure and highways of Kherson region is played by Starlink satellite communication terminals, which make it possible to obtain a stable signal and literally hunt down every truck carrying goods or every fuel tanker, as well as to hit bridge supports precisely. Nearly all the drones used by Ukrainian armed forces are equipped with products made by SpaceX, which are largely used to destroy the civilian population and its property. As in the case of the strikes on highways, the Ukrainian authorities openly acknowledged that the deliberate destruction of Kherson region's infrastructure and call it a political act aimed at pressuring Russia. The following situation arises. With the taxes of European citizens, drones made from Western components are purchased, and with them, Ukraine kills its own former citizens and destroys the infrastructure of territories that for some reason it calls occupied. Amid daily strikes on Kherson region and the other new Russian regions, the servicemen of the Russian armed forces are left with no choice but to eliminate threats and protect the civilian population. Yes, it would be very naive to believe that civilians on the other side of the front do not suffer from Russian strikes. However, the Russian armed forces, unlike the Ukrainian forces, do not seek to deliberately destroy the population in the territories controlled by Ukraine and call it an element of pressure on the Kiev authorities. Another notable point is that Ukrainian strikes often target administrative buildings, schools, hospitals, and other institutions in the Kherson region that were restored after coming under Russian control. Many for the first time since Ukrainians' independence in 1991. There is a great symbolism in this, especially against the backdrop of how the Ukrainian authorities, instead of repairing their own frontline territories, more often prefer to remove properly from there to the central or western parts of the country. People on both sides of the front always suffer from war. It will be foolish to deny this. But in the context of Kherson region, one can observe that one side is rebuilding what has been destroyed and offering people at least some real vision of the future. And the other side is deliberately killing its supposedly former citizens and drawing up plans to seize the very same inborn speed in order to keep forbidding them to speak their native Russian language, to keep banning them from leaving the country, and to keep up the flow of scandalous content showing footage of voluntary mobilization in which recruits assist like criminals. Thank you for this opportunity to speak out loud about the problems of Kherson region and to show the truth of what is happening in Russian territories.
Спасибо большое, Михаил Сергеевич.
Thank you, Mr. Zwinchuk. Today, you told us about the use of inhumane weapons against the population of the Kherson region. And we know from the report of Rodion Miroshnik and from the presentation by Vladimir Salda that there is a true manhunt for people with the use of UAVs. So today we have residents of the Kherson regions who have personally survived the terror of the armed forces of Ukraine. Vladimir Kharman is the former chief physician of the Aloshka Central District Hospital of the Kherson region. And he has survived 2 assassination attempts in September 2024. During one of the assassination attempts, so his wife was killed. In December 2024, Ukrainian kamikaze drone has flown into his office, and he sustained heavy injuries. Mr. Halan, the floor is yours. Good afternoon. It is heavy. It is difficult for me to speak and to remember all these moments from my life. I have always lived with these people, both dead and alive. The situation is very difficult. Several months ago, 4 people were killed in one day and 2 staff members were injured. The next day, 3 persons were killed. The large number of means of transportation that brings food and fuel and ensures the operation of the hospital was burned out. Hospital has become a systemic urban facility for all the civilians that continue to live in Aleshki. Well, we have light, we have water. We always have wounded individuals who are brought every day to the hospitals, and they are brought here in different ways. And sometimes we end up in situations when we cannot evacuate severely wounded individuals to other settlements because everything is mined everywhere. And when drivers go to bring fuel to the hospital, they need to pray and they need to hope that they will return because several people have already died.
Постоянная бомбежка.
We're under constant shelling. We keep repairing the buildings, but they keep getting destroyed. But we are trying to place them back into operations. These people are true heroes. At one time, when I was awarded by the president, I was saying that those people were true heroes and are true heroes. We don't know when it all is going to end. And Russia will prevail, and I'm confident that it will. But I am surprised at this cynicism, at this deliberate killing of people. And I'm surprised at how they deal, how they play with the lives of real people. In any occasion, I'd like to see the swiftest cessation of this harrowing situation. There is no chief medical officer in the hospital, and senior nurses are in charge of hospital's operation now. Well, people realize what's going on, and they do their utmost to help these living heroes. I'd like to end with this. It is hard, or rather impossible, to win in this battle against us, and I realized that neither me nor any other employees will part their ways with this hospital that we have worked so long for. Thank you very much, Mr. Karlan, for your contribution to our event. We hope that the international community will heed your call, and believe you me, participants of this roundtable, this conference, have started texting words of support to the residents of the Kherson region. There are like-minded individuals who are with us in deed and in thought, and together we will bring our common victory closer. I'd like to note that Mr. Karlan has been awarded the Order of Courage and the Medal of St. Luke of Crimea. I'd like to give an opportunity to participants to get acquainted with a footage representing a resident of the settlement of Giroyska of the Kherson region. She's a mother of 3 children. When her life and the life of her children became impossible, she was forced to flee. I'd like a person responsible for the footage to turn it on, please. В основном они ударяют по людям, а не по военным. Они это кто? Украина, конечно. А откуда бьют? С Николаевской стороны.
Нет, Бишкек пишет. Коллеги, по поводу звука.
Dear colleagues, we've seen the comments in the chat that there was no sound, and we took a note of it. There was no sound. We realized we're trying to get into it and solve this issue. I'd like to know whether we have with us Ruslan Agayev, our next speaker on the list. As far as we know, there was a missile alert declared in the Kherson region. There has been a power outage. People have lost access to electricity or telecommunications. It is maybe exactly for this reason that our next eyewitness of AFU crimes hasn't been able to join our conference. We'll go back to it later. Meanwhile, distinguished colleagues, I'd like to note that today at the International Court in The Hague, a case is being considered on genocide in Donbas region. The Zelensky regime has unveiled a large-scale terror in the Kherson region in particular. We'd like to listen to Yelena Dima, who will talk substantially about it. Mother of 3 children. Ukrainian attacks have forced her to leave Novaya Zburyivka, her home, and she has lived through an inundation following the collapse of the Kakhovka HPP. She's now living in a shelter. Madam Dima, you have the floor. Good afternoon. My name is Yelena Dima. My three children, aged 16, 11, and 7, and myself used to live in the settlement of Novosburivka when the special military operation began. It was the 15-kilometer zone that our settlement was situated in. In June 2023, there was a collapse of the Kakhovka HPP. We saw the water flow in, and they told us that the water will reach us in 3 days. When I went outside, I could literally smell the water approaching. I could see the noise. Of course, I was afraid, so were the children. But thank God the water did not reach our settlement. People drowned during that flooding. They were awakened by the inflowing water. They were rescued by other people by boat. So people who had boats rescued others. Emergency workers also assisted in these rescuing operations. You could see people passing by. I would go outside and offer them shelter, food, water. When the water disappeared following the inundation, we saw cars transporting dead bodies, people, animals, cows. I looked them in the eyes and I was so afraid. When the water retreated, we experienced large-scale strikes. Houses, homes were on fire. Civilians were suffering greatly from that. Then later on, I experienced a strike on my vegetable garden. I saw drones flying in the sky. My neighbors knew that I was loyal to Russia. They didn't look at the fact that I had 3 children and they hurled a grenade into my garden. Well, thank God at that time I had already transported my children to the settlement of Bekhteri, so my children didn't experience that horror. There I worked in a bakery. I just made just enough to provide food for my 3 kids. But in that settlement, there were also drone strikes targeting civilian housing, and people were suffering from that, including children and retirees. The administration transported us later on to a temporary accommodation center, and I'd like to express my gratitude to them for issuing documents, passports, and for us and granting us the Russian citizenship. They provide us with food on a gratuitous basis. They provide medical assistance to our family, also free of charge. March 16th to 17th, overnight, I remember it was 1:45. We were sleeping, me and the kids. We heard loud, terrible noises of drones hovering. I woke up and I ran to my children's room. They were sleeping in a separate room. I started shouting, "Wake up, wake up!" Then we went to the corridor. We ran to the corridor and we stayed there in between the rooms. We were joined by our teacher and another mother with her children. We covered the children, and at that time, a drone flew into the room of my girls. The ceiling collapsed on the floor. Just imagine all that structure of iron and concrete. Just imagine if, like, a moment's hesitation could have cost my girls their lives. Emergency workers helped us to evacuate from the building. The personnel of the accommodation center helped us move to a different building. They provided us with humanitarian aid, basic clothing, and food. Of course, my girls were afraid, and now they're are afraid when they hear different noises. They can't fall asleep. They're afraid of everything. Now, the drone attacks have not ceased. They attack everything and everyone. Of course, we live in constant fear. So do the children and the aged people. We would like to return to our home, but we can't because it is under constant attacks. People need to listen to each other, to help each other, to not leave each other behind, to reach out a hand of help, a helping hand to each and everyone. Thank you very much for your attention. Distinguished Madam Dima, thank you very much for joining this online teleconference and telling the international community about what is really happening in the Kherson region. Today, you've touched upon the tragedy linked with the explosion of the Kakhovka HPP that happened in June 2023. It was caused by American HIMARS MLRS, and shrapnel of this MLRS I'm holding now in my hands. Russian Defense Ministry has given them to us. We can see inscriptions in the English language engraved on the shrapnel that allows one to say with absolute certainty what the origin of the shrapnel is of this MLRS. As early as in 2022, Russia urged the UN and the whole international community to take into account the plans of the Kiev regime to cause the collapse of the Kakhovka HPP, but the international community did not react in any way. It is my personal tragedy because I was personally witnessing OSCE sessions when Western delegations were trying to put the blame on the Russian Federation, talking about Western delegations, right? But this is the weapon of these Western countries. They expose themselves. One of the articles of First Additional Protocol of the Geneva Conventions stipulates that it is a violation. It is always approved by NATO countries. In other words, the Kiev terrorist regime received the approval of its puppet masters to cause the collapse of the Kakhovka HPP. The supply of the Kiev regime with military purpose goods, not something to be proud of. We would like Western countries to listen to this signal. We have another footage that Mr. Miroshnik, Ambassador at Large, has provided us with. This time we would be listening to residents of Settlement Sagi. His apartment was set on fire after shelling. He was forced to flee his home because he was afraid of a blockade of his settlement. Just listen to what he's saying. They bombed us. The apartment is destroyed. The furniture store on the first floor is also destroyed. Everything was destroyed. It was the furniture store. Well, that's the situation that we have today. You're alive, and tomorrow we'll have so-called ring of death. There it happens that you're walking and there's a bicycle lying around with bodies. Where we lived in the Zhil Posolok micro district, there are no more 9-story or 5-story buildings. Our apartment burned down. It was on the first line where the Crimean highway runs. Everything burned down there. First everything was flooded, and then it burned down when the bombing started. Well, I had a case that I'd like to share with you. A woman, a candidate of pedagogical sciences, was going to feed the cats. We were sitting near the entrance. Well, then a shelling occurs. The blast wave threw us into the entranceway. Then my wife ran out and saw that Valentina Ivanovna had been torn apart just like that. Jones, of course, many people have died. Someone is riding a bicycle, for example, and gets killed. Many have died. About 5 people died at a humanitarian aid distribution point. Everyone went to a queue up to 6 o'clock. One acquaintance went like that, and she was killed. The strikes were at places where they knew there would be gatherings of people. Dear colleagues, using drones, the AFU are planting anti-personnel mines in the Kherson region that are activated by metal, sound, or movement, as well as booby traps that are disguised as everyday items. Residents of the Kherson region are regularly becoming victims of Ukrainian mines, and this fate has also befallen on Vladimir Anatolievich from the settlement of Sagi, from Aloshki municipal district. He's now in the hospital where Rodion Miroshnik talked to him. Vladimir Anatolievich was going to a neighboring settlement, but he stepped on a mine and it exploded. Let's look at the other footage.
There were 4 of us. 1 woman is missing, 1 dead. My leg was blown off, and the 4th woman is also here in the hospital. I don't know anything. I never really understood. First one exploded, and then a second one. I came up when I was already lying on the ground, and my leg was dangling because the bone was broken. Then I remember the car drones fly there every day. I don't even know how many there are. You could lose count. The Ukrainian forces drop them. I don't understand myself how they trigger within a meter or a half or approach. This mine goes off like a magnet. So it reacts to metal, yes. It's a car passes nearby, it will go off, yes. And who drops the mines? Ukraine. Who else? They come from them. Now I would like to give the floor to our last speaker, of course not by the importance. International journalist operating in the Kherson region, covering with courage what is happening. Among them is the Italian worker correspondent Andrea Lucidi, who is perhaps one of the most prominent representatives of his profession. In 2024, Mr. Lucidi traveled to Kherson region and personally encountered the threats to civilians that the residents of Kherson have already spoken about today. Mr. Lucidi is joining us from Lugansk. Andrea, please, the floor and the screen is yours.
To speak here today. My name is Andrea Lucidi, I'm a journalist. I work today for the Italian outlet Visione TV as a correspondent in the Russian Federation. In April 2024, I visited the Kherson region in order to document the situation on the ground. I would like to speak not in abstract terms, but from my personal experience. During that trip, I visited several areas of the Kherson region that were exposed to the constant danger. These were not only military risks in the strict sense of the word. What struck me most was the fact that even ordinary civilians' movement had become extremely dangerous. Roads, villages, infrastructures, and even people traveling in civilian cars would become targets at any moment. At one point, I was traveling in a civilian car together with a colleague from News Front. We were not in military vehicle, we were not wearing military uniforms, we were not carrying weapons. We were journalists wearing civilian clothes in a civilian car. During that movement, a Ukrainian drone began to follow the car in which we were traveling. It was a very tense moment. The danger was direct and immediate. When a drone starts following your car in an area close to the line of contact, you understand that on the ground, the distinction between combatants and civilians can disappear very quickly. For me, this was one of the clearest examples of how dangerous the situation is for anyone present in those areas, including civilians, journalists, volunteers, doctors, and emergency workers. On another occasion, on the same day, while I was filming near the Novakakovka Dam, another drone approached the area where I was working. Again, I was wearing civilian clothes. I was filming as a journalist. I was not part of any military unit, yet the threat was real. The moment was particularly tense also because of the possible presence of snipers. When you film in such an area, you are exposed from different directions. You don't know whether the danger will come from artillery, drones, or small arms. I want to stress one important point. These threats were not direct against people who were clearly not soldiers. We were wearing civilian clothes, traveling in civilian vehicles, and carrying out journalistic work. There was no military equipment in the car. Our movement had no military purpose. Unfortunately, what I personally experienced in Kherson region does not appear to be an isolated case. In recent months and years, several incidents have been reported showing that Ukrainian forces use drones not only against the military targets, but also in situations involving civilians and civilian infrastructure. We have seen reports of the attacks in Starobelsk, of drone strikes hitting trains in Crimea, and attacks against civilian buses. These cases raise very serious questions. If drones are used against buses, trains, civilian cars, or people who are clearly not taking part in hostilities, then the problem is not only military. This personal experience helped me understand more deeply what local residents have to face every day. For a journalist, moments like these last minutes of hours, for civilians living in the Kherson region, this danger is part of daily life. They have to travel on roads that may be threatened by drones. They have to fear artillery strikes, mines, and attacks against infrastructure. They have to ask themselves whether it is safe to go outside, to receive medical assistance, to bring food to their relatives, or simply to continue living in their own homes. The use of drones has changed the nature of danger for civilians. A drone can observe, follow, and strike individual vehicles or individual people. This creates a climate of permanent fear. Even when there is no active shelling, the population know that the threat may be above them, invisible or barely visible at any moment. I would also like to say one more thing. During my visit, I also went to the city of Alyoshki. There I saw the traces of shelling near a monument dedicated to the Great Patriotic War. These details stuck me deeply. I would like to share some pictures of this, if you give me one moment. I have here, sorry. I think you can see it. You can see the photos.
Да, уважаемый Андреа, мы все видим.
Okay.
We can see.
Yes, we see the pictures.
Yeah, for many people in Russia and the post-Soviet space, monuments dedicated to the Great Patriotic War are a part of family memory, historical identity, and collective mourning. Almost every family has a story connected to the war. Seeing traces of shelling near such a monument gave me the impression that the attack was not directly only against a physical space, but also against memory itself. It was as if someone wanted to erase the historical memory of the people living there. Of course, every military conflict destroys material things, but when memorials, monuments, cemeteries, schools, hospitals, and civilian symbols are damaged or threatened, that wound becomes deeper. It affects the identity of a community. As a journalist, we have the responsibility to document these realities. The principle of distinction between combatants and civilians is not a detail. It's one of the foundations of international humanitarian law. When civilian cars, civilian infrastructure, public transport, or people wearing civilian clothes are exposed to attacks, this principle is put in serious danger. Today, I speak as a person who was there, who saw the situation with his own eyes, and who personally experienced the danger of drones in the Kherson region. My experience was limited in time, but it was enough to understand the pressure under which the local population lives every day. For this reason, I believe it's essential that the international community, humanitarian organizations, journalists, and the legal experts pay serious attention to what is happening in the Kherson region. Those situations must be documented, investigated, and discussed openly. Silence does not protect civilians. Silence only makes it easier to ignore their suffering, a suffering that is too often ignored for political reasons, according to the typical Western double standard. Thank you for the attention.
Спасибо вам, Андреа.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Dear participants, now I would like to open the open discussion. I want everyone present to actively speak on the topics raised today, as well as to ask questions to the main speakers. We see that in our chat, we see the request for the questions, and now I would like to give the floor to the special representative of for the cooperation with Russia, co-chairpersons on economics investments of Nicaragua, Laureano Ortega Murillo. Your Excellency, you have the floor. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to give my best regards and regards on the on behalf of Daniel Ortega, the President of the Republic, and Madam Murillo, the President, to the President of the Russian Federation, to our brother, to the government, and to the Russian people. Nicaragua would like to confirm at present our solidarity with the Russian Federation, with those regions that joined and acceded to the Russian Federation, with the population and citizens of your country. You are waging a very important war for the life of the citizens, for the entire peoples of the Russian Federation, for the peace in the entire peace. We also express in our condemnation regarding those acts of terrorism committed against these regions of the Russian Federation and other towns and cities of your great country. Our co-chairpersons would like to convey the words of condolences and solidarity with the brother peoples of the Russian Federation, of your Russia, since our brotherhood and our government is honored to sign the cooperation agreements with new regions of the Russian Federation, Donetsk, Zaporozhye region, Kherson region, and they will sign on 22nd of September. 2025 in Moscow. We also had the honor to sign with the foreign minister of the Russian Federation, our brother Mr. Lavrov, the joint declaration on condemnations and setting up of the working group to counter the unilateral sanctions imposed by the Western countries on our countries. Russia and Nicaragua are acting together. Historically, it is the way, and we together always have fought for solidarity, integrity, and independence of our countries. And we are fighting against the evil, which is trying as much as possible to conquer the world at large, especially today, in the light of the situation around the Ukraine, financed by the Western countries and NATO. And our country would like to confirm its solidarity together with your people in the face of those attacks against the civil infrastructure and civilians, against nuclear power plants and critical infrastructure. These are terrorist acts which hamper the life of all the people in the world. And by saying this, we would like to confirm our continuous support for the residents of the Kherson region. Nicaragua is a brother country, and we will continue to fight at this battlefield, continue trying, doing everything possible to improve our lives, moving forward and promoting our achievements, our friendship, and supporting the work of your president, Mr. Putin, in order to achieve a new world order. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear friends. Your Excellency, we sincerely would like to thank you for the words of the support, and we sincerely appreciate our Nicaraguan friends for participating in this event. You are frequent guests in our events. Long live the Russian-Nicaraguan friendship. Dear friends, among those willing to speak, we have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Abkhazia, and I would like to give the floor to our distinguished colleagues and friends. You have the floor. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I would like, on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Abkhazia, to greet you and to thank you for inviting me to take part in this event. First of all, I would like to say that we follow quite closely the development of the situation in the region, and we share the concerns regarding the humanitarian consequences of for the civilians in this region. We are aware of the terrible humanitarian situation in this region, and we seriously condemning the strikes against civil infrastructure, civilians, distant mining of the roads, strikes against infrastructure and roads, and everything mentioned by Mr. Saldo against hospitals. These are flagrant violations of all possible rules of humanitarian law. Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Abkhazia assumes that the norms of humanitarian law, which is the protection of civilians, the object of civil infrastructure, is not admissible, and these rules should be strictly observed, and all facts that goes in contrast to that should be properly investigated and should not be the subject of these political speculations. As the country, which has its own history of wars and civil infrastructure destruction, we understand this situation, and we stand close to the civilians of this region, which face on a daily manner these strikes by Ukrainian armed forces. We would like to note as well that the Republic of Abkhazia consistently supports the relations with the Russian Federation and supports its foreign policy starting from 2014, which is confirmed by the growing number of volunteers which joined the volunteers fighting in the region and who share the idea of the security and protection of the Russian world.
We send humanitarian assistance and provide assistance and stand in solidarity with the population of the frontline regions. We hope that a just settlement will be reached. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak. Thank you. We thank Jamal for the valuable contribution to our event. I would like to recall our colleagues that it was a head of the Department of Strategic Cooperation, Jambal Gamba of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Abkhazia. We have Nikola Maric in our studio. Good afternoon. Thank you for being with us. You represent the Russian youth on cultural affairs. What is your position, and what is the position of your like-minded partners on what you heard today? And in your opinion, Mr. Maric, what could the international community do in this regard? Thank you for asking me this question. First and foremost, I would like to welcome everyone present and to thank organizers for giving me an opportunity to take part in this important discussion. Today, we're talking not only about politics, but about people, about families that live under the constant threat of shellings, about children who have to spend their days in bomb shelters, about civilians who lost their closed ones and houses. We cannot ignore such sufferings, and I hope that all countries and all parties to the conflict will reach an agreement, and that the suffering of innocent civilians will be put to an end, because we have only one life, we only live once, and the life is invaluable. But unfortunately, there are more and more reports about the attacks against civilian infrastructure in the Kherson region and other Russian regions, the use of UAVs against civilians, and other actions of serious concern. If such facts are confirmed, that should receive objective international assessments, and those responsible should be brought to justice. Terrorism against the civilians cannot be justified by any political or military goals. The world community should pay equal attention to the suffering of all civilians, regardless of where they are and in whose territory they live. To address the issue, we need to determine in whose interest it is to sacrifice innocent human lives for making profit, as for making resources as well as making money in the military industry. Who is interested in taking life, freedom, and in making the living standards worse? The global inflation, that's our common problem, and we need to address it together. Only through honest dialogue, respect for facts, and desire to protect human life will be able to bring peace closer. Today, quite often we see that the Russian nationals are condemned in Europe for their patriotism and for what they just send humanitarian assistance or even speak the Russian language. But what is patriotism? That's the love for motherland. This love should be pure and selfless. Patriotism doesn't mean the call for aggression or war. War is a horrible thing, because I was raised in Respublika Srpska in Bosnia and Herzegovina. That's why I am well aware of how severe the consequences are of the war and what are the serious effects it leaves in your destiny. To speak the mother tongue and to help closed ones in a motherland shouldn't be punishable, because to help people is the most beautiful thing, and for me personally, this is the most honored thing. Today, it's especially important to support our compatriots in these difficult times, and I would like to speak to the Russian citizens, to those who lost their homes and closed ones, those who protect their motherland, and those who wait for the return of their closed ones. I would like to express my sincere support and wish you bravery, forces, power, and hope, because your closed ones should be alive and should be healthy, and your families. And I wish the peace to prevail in the world, calmness and confidence in tomorrow's day. It's important to know that the unity of the Russian people is important as ever before. Thank you. I would like to give the floor to Cuba. We see that the embassy in Havana wants to say a few words. Colleagues, yes, please. Havana, can you hear us? While they have some connection problems and they are connecting to the session, I would like to give the floor to Panama. Yes, please. Good afternoon. Colleagues, distinguished colleagues from the Russian Federation. I speak on behalf of the Committee on Friendship with the Russian Federation. I would like to express our solidarity with the Russian people in particular. We would like to express our solidarity with people who live on the frontline territories that are suffering. They are suffering from the actions taken by fascists. And we would like to make several comments. First of all, we would like to emphasize, as many others have, as previous speakers have mentioned, today we are dealing with situations and failures that are being made during the war. We are dealing with collateral damage, and we see that there is a systematic policy that is pursued against civilians, and the other side is using fear, and they are intimidating civilians to make advances on the battlefield. And we have seen in different conflicts that the religion, Orthodox Christianity, are attacked, and this is a clear attempt to pursue ethnic cleansing and genocide. Such attacks, like attacks against journalists, destruction of the Novaya Kakhovka Dam, could be equal to the use of weapons of mass destruction. These are discriminate destruction of targets, and that inflicts a huge damage to the environment. We express our support and solidarity not only with the Russian Federation, but with all other countries who are suffering from it. That's a threat to the entire humanity. Nazis and fascists are using weapons against the Russian Federation, but this regime is both a threat to all peoples of the world. We need to prevent their access to nuclear weapons because they will use them right away. They have fanaticists who want to obtain nuclear weapons, and they won't even think before using it against Russia, because if they have dirty bombs, again, they would use them without even thinking. And the same goes to chemical, biological, and bacteriological weapons. They will use it without having any second thoughts, because that's the regime of Nazis and fascists who do not value human lives. They do not respect the international humanitarian law and other rules of behavior. We express our sincere solidarity with the Russian people. They sacrifice their lives at the level of peoples, at the level of economy, as they did that during the World War II. And again, the Russian Federation bears primary responsibility to stop the spread of Nazism. The position that is taken by the regime and their attacks, in our point of view, pose the largest danger to the modern humanity today. Thank you. We thank you for your comment, and we thank you for your contribution to our teleconference. I would like to give the floor to Sofia. We know that there is a question from the journalist of Eurocom TV. Yes, please. Colleague, please, the floor is yours. Good afternoon. Well, given everything we've had today, it has become clear that the crimes committed by the armed forces of Ukraine are portrayed as by the European mass media as the right to self-defense. They do not cover any violent crimes when committed by the armed forces of Ukraine, when it is clear that they commit crimes. Well, everyone is talking about territorial issues, but no one is saying anything about people, about their fate, about their life. It seems that this no one needs these people today. and it's strange. It makes us question why Ukraine wants to return these territories, why Ukraine wants these territories back. We believe that Western media are accomplices in this situation. These are not mass media, they are military agitators. They are not speaking, their materials has nothing to do with human rights and promotion of the international humanitarian law. I believe that Ukraine is not an entity of the international law because Zelensky and its colleague have clearly stated on many occasions that they are not interested in human rights and they are just ignoring them. I have a question, a specific one. Maybe Mr. Miroshnik can answer that, or Vladimir Salda, governor of the Kherson region, could answer my question. How many civilians were killed in the Kherson region this year, and how many children are among them? That's my question. Thank you. Thank you. Probably Mr. Miroshnik will answer the question and will add to the discussion we are having right now. Yes. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you for the question. First of all, thank you for your words of support and for your question that you've raised. Despite the fact that a missile attack alert was announced in the Kherson region, and some of the officials from the Kherson region are not able to connect our session due to the fact that they are disconnected from the internet. The population of the Kherson region is dealing with power supply outages, but yet we have Tatiana Kuzmich, who is the deputy governor for social issues, and I hope that Madam Kuzmich will be ready to answer your question and provide statistics. I can only provide figures that we have as of today, talking about all the territories, because today the Kherson region is unfortunately one of the top 3 regions that are shelled the most, and it's one of the top 3 regions with the largest number of deaths and injuries among the civilian population. So our statistics figures that since February 2020, 1,166 persons were injured over the past 6 months. And I think that Madam Kuzmich will be ready to provide more information about the Kherson region if she has the statistical information. Madam Kuzmich, we kindly ask you to join our discussion, please. Hello, colleagues. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. First, I would like to express my gratitude on my personal behalf because in 2022, in December 2022, I was appointed as the deputy governor for the, and I'm responsible for the work with evacuees. So since my appointment, I was working with evacuees as well as, and the same goes for my team. We have a unit on the work with evacuees. As for the question, I can say that in the first 6 months of 2026, as a result of the aggression by the armed forces of Ukraine, 544 civilians were killed and 3,724 civilians sustained wounds. And there are 20 children among those who were killed, and 109 children were injured. 6 health professionals were killed, and 20 health professionals were injured. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that this is the information for the first 6 months of 2026. I would like also to emphasize that these are civilian population. Thank you, Madam Kuzmich. Yes, please, Vienna. Madam Kuzmich, Mr. Miroshnik, thank you. Now I would like to give the floor to Brussels. Alexander Pinas, please, the floor is yours. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Да. Thank you for giving me the floor. I'm in Brussels. As you already said, I'm a journalist, and I'm the only journalist in Belgium who speaks about the real situation in Russia and in Ukraine in quite an unusual format, because we're dealing with a lot of misinformation, with a lot of fakes, and we are dealing with hatred of the EU towards Russia. I've already told you about the attitude of European institutions to Russia. In September 2025, I went to Donbass and I shot a film, and they didn't allow me to screen this film in Brussels, and I faced with pressure in Portugal, in France. Wherever I tried to show my film, I faced with huge difficulties. I would like to show you a teaser trailer for the video, and if you allow, I would like to show my screen and to show you the teaser. 1 second, please. For those who have connected our session, and for those who didn't have an opportunity to participate in our teleconference, we'll get the link to the video later. I think that the entire community is concerned with the situation, and I think that everyone needs to watch the movie. And I think if it was not for censorship, that film would receive a large audience, and a lot of people would be able to see what is truly going on there. This video has subtitles in Dutch, Spanish, German, Italian, Portuguese. And I hope that the sound will, you will have the sound, and I'm sharing my screen. Is it working? Can you see it? Moscow, 6:43 a.m. The word Russia has become a trigger in the West. When people hear Russia, they think of poverty, terrorism, tyranny, economic collapse, war. Those who were killed in our country, rest in peace.
Every nation, every person must remember his history.
We met Ukrainian soldiers in Donbass. The Russians saved me and got me out. A drone struck the school. Repairs have already begun. It's simply a school in Donetsk, in Donbass. It was attacked with a drone. If Russia hadn't defended us here, we would simply have been wiped out. You can see all the shattered windows. People are still living here in the West. We are told that Zelensky is a savior and Putin is a dictator. We are at Donetsk University.
Let's see, because it's not our reality.
We are the heirs of a shared history that has repeatedly shown our peoples can achieve great things when united in solidarity. Thanks to your reporting, through your cameras, millions of people will see the real situation.
Well, I hope you have been able to watch this video, this trailer. I'm not going to delve into details about the complications that we faced when we're shooting this movie. I'd like to express my gratitude to you for your work. It would be hard, it would have been harder to cover this event, so I'd like to share the link in the chat. And I'd also like to visit Russia and to participate in the festival in Russia. Please watch by clicking the link, and please let me know if you're interested in such a format, because misinformation is the main tool used by the enemy, and now the scale of this misinformation is growing horrendously, and I hope that we can break this vicious cycle. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing the teaser for your documentary. I think that the link that you have shared in the chat will be in high demand among our participants. Here we are gathered as a community of like-minded people. We're all fighting for truth, and it is gratifying that in Italy, there is Alexander Lucidi. In Belgium, there's Alexander Penas, and people like you. And I hope that such brilliant professional and experts fighting for truth and pure information, fighting for liberation from double standards exist and work. And it is important to pave the way for people like you. This is our common cause. Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Ivazan from Armenia, and following that, I see that I can give the floor to the embassy in Mexico. First Armenia, then Mexico. Good afternoon, dear participants of the forum. I'd like to start with expressing my entire support of the special military operation and the actions of Russia on the Ukrainian front. This is a just war that Russia is waging. This is a just war against a Nazi regime and its Western sponsors. Countries that inspire the Kiev regime. They have captured the ancient city of Kiev and other historic areas of the Russian world. And from there, they're waging their war against Russia. To my mind, Russia's action cannot amount to aggression. Russia has held referenda on some territories where the local population has voiced its support to join Russia. As far as the rest of Ukraine is concerned, I'd like to recall the following. When Moscow recognized Ukraine's independence back in the day, Ukraine said that it would be neutral and effectively maintain the Russian civilization and the language present there. Basically, the Ukrainian regime has violated this obligation. Henceforth, I think that Russia's actions is a war of liberation on that Russia is unfolding on its historic territory, on the territory of the Russian world. Today, we've heard reports about heinous crimes by the Kiev regime and its Western masters that place themselves above everyone else and think that they are exceptional, and they think that they can, at others' expense, they can solve their geopolitical tasks. If this neo-Nazi regime and its Western sponsors are not stopped this plague will spread across the whole globe. And we will see manifestations of such regimes in other countries, and we will not know what country is going to be the next victim. Now, Russia today is fighting for its future and the future of the whole world. My great grandfather fought in the Great Patriotic War. He reached Europe, liberated Europe. The grandfather of my wife also fought in the Great Patriotic War, first in Europe, then he joined another front and fought against militarist Japan. As descendant of this participant of the Great Patriotic War, I cannot have any other stance than the one I have just voiced. I fully support the course of Russia, and I'm confident that this time Russia will prevail. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Ivazan, Chairman of the Information Analytical Center, Lewis. I'd like to give the floor to the Russian Embassy to Mexico. The Russian House in Congo, you are next. Mexico? The media, can you please turn on your mic? Thank you very much. I'm in Mexico now. We've had a case that touched upon well, in our history, we know what empire is, and we are afraid what's happening in the Kherson region. It's the ongoing war with neo-Nazism in Ukraine that also is inspired by Europe gets weapons from the West. Russia heads the movement to build a multipolar world. It's a just cause. I have a question. The U.S. Said recently that it will help Ukraine in manufacturing its Patriot missiles. We have a question. Who would benefit from this measure that would only harm parents, children, doctors? Our reports will help the community to communicate to the UN and other international communications the need to take more decisive measures against this genocide. What else do people need? Do Russian people need that is suffering from Ukraine's actions? Thank you. Mr. Miroshnik, I'd like to give the floor to you so you can comment on this. Thank you very much for the question you asked and for the concern that you are now expressing. Why? Because this issue that you voiced, this is not a decision. This is a statement that Mr. Trump has given because he wants to grant a license to Ukraine to manufacture Patriot missiles in Ukraine. If you look at these situations, one should remember one simple thing that Westerners do not like at all. We're all well aware what the recipe is, a clear recipe is to end the war in Ukraine. It's the cessation of Western support. As soon as the West stops to support Ukraine militarily, politically, once they stop to supply Scalp, Patriot, HIMARS, MLRS to Ukraine, other types of weapons, the war will end immediately. Days or maybe weeks will pass, and then the war will end. Maybe Ukraine will try to fight till the last soldier, but this is the simple answer. Please communicate it to your audiences. 90%, this is the level of dependence of Ukraine from Western countries. following the talks in Ankara in the European Union, they've counted 150 billion US dollars of military support granted to Ukraine. That includes supplies of Patriot, HIMARS, and MLRS to Ukraine. If that hadn't been supplied to Ukraine, people wouldn't have died. Settlements wouldn't have been destroyed. To answer your question about Patriots, this is the direct support of the war and of its continuation. Clearly, the NATO bloc, the European Union, want the war to end. They have to stop financing this war. From 1991 to 2014, to ensure prosperity of Ukraine, it was provided with 30 billion US dollars. It was 20 years of support. Now, I've given you a different number. The so-called Western partners of Ukraine want to supply Ukraine or to provide Ukraine with about 150 billion US dollars. So if you say that people care about prosperity of Ukraine, this is blatant lies. They just finance bloodshed. Stop supplying Ukraine with weapons, then the war will end. This is a clear and simple recipe. Thank you very much, Mr. Miroshnik. I cannot help but agree with what you have just said. We clearly remember the statement of former European diplomacy Joseph Borrell. I remember he was saying that in case the Kiev regime stops receiving weapons, the conflict will end in days, weeks, maybe months. So the recipe for ending the conflict is very simple. I'd like to emphasize that the supplies that we see today to the Kiev regime violate the principles of responsible delivery of conventional weapons. This is OSCE document on small arms and light weapons, OSCE principles regulating the transfer of other types of weapons. Everything has been violated. This is very telling. As promised, I'd like to give the floor to the Russian House in Congo. Then we will move to Belgrade. The Russian House in Congo, you have the floor. Thank you very much for giving us the floor. We are reporters. We're in Brazzaville, in Congo. We represent the media community, and we are genuinely shocked by what Ukrainians are doing against civilians in the Kherson region. Ukraine does not make any distinction between combatants and non-combatants. In doing that, they threat doctors, the youth, families. They destroy culture, the energy grid, hospitals. If you remain silent, if you remain indifferent, you would not find a way out of it. This is a true shock for us. The time is nigh to realize what the practical measures are that Russia can take to put an end to these atrocities. In 2022, political processes took place. A referendum. They wanted to hold a referendum, but what's happening now is different. We should act counter to these actions. It is important for the international community to assume the responsibility And Russia should be effective as ever to protect themselves and its regions. Thank you very much. That's what is a cause for concern to us. Thank you. Thank you very much, colleagues. I'd like to now give the floor to Belgrade and to listen to two statements. Following that, we will go back to our keynote speakers so that they can answer the questions. I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Alexander Pavich. You have the floor.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, I would like to thank the Russian Foreign Ministry and the representatives of the Russian Federation for organizing this very important and informative and deeply touching gathering, this conference. And of course, I would like to express my support to all the people in Russia, especially in the Donbass and the Kherson and Zaporozhye regions, who are suffering from this war that's being waged against not just the Russian people, but also the Ukrainian people, who are being used as a tool of the West, unfortunately. We have experienced how little regard the West has, the current Western political leadership has for international law, for humanitarian law, for the Geneva Conventions. We experienced it on our own skin during the wars, during the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 90s, as well as during the NATO aggression against our country in 1999. And we know what the rules-based order means. It means they make up the rules as they go along. And if they don't like the rules, they change them or they ignore them. So we among ourselves, we definitely should share and listen to the experiences of the victims and to know the true state of affairs on the ground. But again, the current leadership in the West, they don't have any regard for human suffering, and they plan to fight to the last Ukrainian. That is very clear. They need Ukraine to test new military technologies. They need to pump up a fake Russian threat in order to justify military spending. The European Union has earmarked 800 billion euros until 2030 for military spending, for their military-industrial complex. So it's clear that they need an enemy and that they're going to continue fighting. We should have no illusions about that. And what the Russian leadership has said, especially over the past few days and weeks, that because of the attacks in the Russian Federation as a whole, that the security zones around the new regions of the Russian Federation will have to be broadened. That is absolutely clear, because why should Russia continue to allow for its civilians and for its infrastructure to suffer from incessant attacks? Obviously, as Mr. Lavrov said, I think yesterday, there are no more illusions that the Western countries really want to negotiate about peace. So I just want to express my understanding and solidarity with what Russia will have to do, widening security zones, and I'm afraid it might have to take all of Ukraine, because as long as there's as long as there are Ukrainians left, whom the West can send as cannon fodder against Russians, they're going to use them. And unfortunately, these are the hard facts. As long as we have the current leaderships in power, especially in the main European capitals. Once again, I want to express my solidarity with the Russian Federation, with all the Russian civilians, and my condolences for all those who have lost their dear ones during this horrible war. Thank you.
Уважаемый господин Павич, спасибо.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pavic. Thank you for your comments and the words of the support. We had a member of the Parliament of the Republic of Serbia, Mr. Pavic. Now I would like to give the floor to Dušana Pacic, the representative of the non-commercial organization Russia-Serbia. You have the floor.
First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me opportunity to participate on this conference and for making it possible for the voice of Russian civilians suffering in the Kherson region to be heard. I'm addressing you today as a journalist from Serbia. I believe that fundamental duty of our profession is to witness to the suffering of ordinary people, especially when their voices fail to reach the public. In Serbia, we understand very well what it means when civilian victims become the subject of political and media selectivity. During the breaking up of former Yugoslavia and the NATO aggression in 1999, many Serbian civilians were killed, while their suffering often did not receive the same attention or company as the suffering of others. We also remember the civilian victims in the Republic Serbian Krajina during ethnic cleansing community named Operation Storm, performed by Croatian neo-fascist forces and US military companies whose suffering remains largely overlooked. NATO describes civilian victims as collateral damage, a monstrous term that has become Western explanation deaths of innocent people. So how should we describe the drone attack carried out by the Ukrainian militarists on January 1st against the cafe and hotel the Black Sea coast in Horlivka, where civilians were celebrating the New Year? 29 people, including 2 minors, were killed, and at least 60 others were injured. For all of us who respect international law, the killing of civilians is a war crime and nothing else. That is why many people in Serbia recognize the suffering of civilians in the Kherson region. Our responsibility is to speak about every civilian victim, regardless of nationality. If we accept the same victims deserve compassion, while others deserve silence, we abandon not only professional ethic, but only our basic human values. In international humanitarian law has any meaning, it must protect every civilian equally. As both a human being and a journalist from Serbia, I expressed my solidarity with all of families in the Kherson region who have lost their loved one. I hope the day will come when civilian victims will no longer be divided into ours and theirs, but when every lost human life will be valued equality and normed with the same compassion. Thank you for all attention.
Спасибо большое, господин Апачич. На этом я хотела бы передать слово в Москву.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pacic. Now I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Miroshnik for his replies and comments. Thank you very much indeed. There are a lot of fundamental questions. We can only express our appreciations for your deep understanding and the attempts to figure out what is going on, especially among the journalists and those who are trying to understand better the situation. We try to talk about this during this conference, and I believe we can also share those data and information which are being prepared on a daily manner, and I do hope that our colleagues who made documentals on the situation in other regions, new regions, and we are going to expect the same movies for Kherson region. You were right by saying that the Western countries are trying to put a blind eye to the gross violations of the humanitarian law. They are trying to protect their own figure who was tortured, nurtured, and brought about. They are trying to silence what is going on in the Kherson region, and I feel by the words of those speakers that you know very well what is the blowing of the dam in Kakhovka, what is the fate of the residents of Zhelezny Port and other regions who are under continuous attacks from Ukraine, and it should be clearly understood and accessible for those who monitor the situation on a constant manner. And the responsibility should come, and it could be done only under the huge international pressure by those countries who believe that the Geneva Convention should be observed, especially with respect to those criminals who keep ignoring this, who allow to ignore this. Thank you for your understanding and such deep knowledge about what is happening in the region, especially in the Kherson Oblast. I also would like sincerely join to the words of thanks to our participants for their active contribution and the will to speak. Together with my colleagues in our delegation in Vienna, we see your request, but unfortunately we are coming to an end in terms of time for this conference. Now I would like to give the floor to the last 5 speakers, and after that we will steadily move into the end of this conference. We have Representative Mr. Estrada, journalist from Paraguay, and his acting is Diego. If you are with us, we would like to give the floor to you. Good afternoon, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends from Russia and other countries of the world participating in today's conference. From the Russian embassy in Paraguay, I also joined this conference. I have the possibility to move forward this initiative so that to spread, disseminate this information about the situation in the Kherson region. I also cooperate with the RT channel, TV channel here in Paraguay, and from Paraguay, we also regard ourselves as the victims of this disinformation campaign. We would like to express solidarity with those who are under attack in Kherson region, with those who fight with fascist forces in the Kiev regime. Your fight means the fight of all peoples who are now fighting for the more fair and peaceful world. We would like to send our solidarity to the victims of this conflict from Paraguay. And this information war is a part of this fight. Today we see in the European countries the very harsh, aggressive policy of censorship, especially with respect to those who are trying to disseminate or provide information by RT channel, or those who are trying to provide this subjective information. I have a question Regarding the European countries' stance, regarding the European countries, NATO countries, Germany, everything which deals with the production of technologies, there are some indications that this support of military support of Ukraine could grow, and Ukraine is attacking refineries producing gas or motor gasoline. How can you counter this situation, deal with this situation? And another question, what can you do in with respect to the Kherson region so that the international team of journalists can go there to cover the situation on the ground? The same what was done in Palestine when a team of international journalists went there to gather and provide subjective and objective information regarding the situation there. And in this sense, Paraguay stands side by side with you. Thank you very much, Diego. Now I would like to gather more questions and comments, and after that we will give this, we will send it to Moscow for your response. Now I would like to ask Alina Sherimova, blogger from Tajikistan, to speak. Our long friend Alim, you have the floor. I would like to greet you, and today I would like to express the gratitude personally to you, to those people working in Vienna, and personally to Rodion Valerievich, who organizes these teleconferences. Yes, we're trying to share this information which is being concealed by the Western countries. Our compassion to those suffering in the Kherson region. And today we see that in the context of the tough censorship, any information which is deviating from the mainstream information provided to the Western viewers regarding what is going on in the area of hostilities and other regions. So what you are doing is a huge work, inviting mass media representatives, activists, and so on. And here I would like to turn to those people participating in this teleconference. Please do not be afraid of sharing this information, spreading this information, telling the truth. We know about the persecution of journalists who are trying to provide objective information, the information as it is. And we heard about the crimes committed by the Ukrainian regime. And we heard a lot of comparisons with the Nazis Germany, but Nazis did this against the Soviet peoples during the Second World War, and those similarities made today when people are burnt or killed or attacked by drones, and they see that this is a civilian or an ambulance which is going to help people. This is not about military operations or hostilities, which shouldn't be silenced. And I would like to urge the activists and other people, journalists, please be brave to bring this information to a greater number of people, so that to avoid some speculation claiming that we were not aware of what was happening in the Kherson region. And once again, special thanks to the Russian delegation in Vienna. Mr. Miroshnik has, please be brave. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Alimberg. Special thanks to you for supporting our format. Your brave position merits. Now I would like to give the floor to Myanmar, to Dr. Naing Sveon Mrs.
Thank you, Madam. Distinguished esteemed panelists and colleagues participating today. It is both a privilege and also solemn responsibility to discuss in this gathering. As a senior advisor and a researcher from Myanmar, a country too familiar with geopolitical entanglement, I approach the evidence presented through the dual lenses of comparative conflict analysis and international humanitarian law. What the framework described as a war of terror tactics in the Kherson regions appears to represent a deliberate evolution in the contemporary warfare, a shift from primary military to military engagements towards systemic targeting of the human and social ecology of a territory. From this perspective, three structural characteristics stand out clearly in the documented incidents from the district in Kherson region, such as Alexki and Skadovsk. First, the urbanization of logistics and everyday civilian life. The extensive deployment of remote mining on public roads and transport corridors goes far beyond the conventional tactical denial of terrain. In conflict studies, we recognize this as a form of infrastructure warfare that seek to dismantle the basic civilian survival matrix. By rendering roads lethal to ordinary movement, such measures effectively isolate communities from supplying of food, medicines, and essential goods. What was once routine, traveling to a market, transporting patients, or delivering humanitarian assistance, becomes a life-threatening gamble. This is not merely disruption. It is the engineered creation of a passive seed designed to make sustained habitation increasingly and tangible for the local population. Second, the deliberate targeting and obstruction of emergency response and humanitarian mitigation. The reported strikes by UAV and artillery against medical personnel, rescue team, and first responders represent a particular grave development and a well-established principle of international humanitarian law. Medical and humanitarian actors enjoy protected status precisely because they constitute the secondary safety net for civilians caught in conflict. When this net is systematically torn, the consequences are both material and psychological. Materially, initial casualties are compounded by the denial of timely trauma care. Psychologically, the population is left with a profound sense of institutional abandonment, no safe space, no reliable rescue, no continuity of care. This dual effect erodes not only immediate survivability, but also their social trust and resilience that communities rely upon during the prolonged crisis. Third, the asymmetric integration of advanced external technologies into civilian targeting. The reliance of the NATO and EU supplying precision-guided systems, loitering munition, and rear-time UAV surveillance introduce a qualitatively new dimension of vertical psychological pressure. Allied order, less accurate artillery, these platforms enable persistent observation and selective engagement. In academic terms, this diminishes the plausible deniability of collateral damage. When high-precision weapons are repeatedly directed at civilian infrastructure, homes, and essential services, the pattern suggests a calculated strategy aimed at generating sustained fear and disorientation across the population rather than an isolated battlefield effect. In conclusion, these interlocking characteristics point toward a broader strategic logic of population degradation and cost displacement. By combining infrastructure isolation, the neutralization of humanitarian response, and technologically enabled psychological attrition, the approach appears designed to fracture social cohesion, punish passive political alignment through geographic, and ultimately render certain areas unlivable for those who remain. For the international academic and humanitarian community, the meticulous documentation and empirical analysis of these patterns remain essential. Only thorough, rigorous, evidence-based scrutiny, free from the distortion of wartime narrative, can we uphold the integrity of international law and better understanding the evolving the morphology of the modern conflict. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to Indonesia, and then we will give the floor to a representative from Mexico. As for Indonesia, we have Wilson Lalenke. Please, the floor is yours.
Much. Good afternoon, distinguished organizer, excellencies, and fellow participants. I'm Wilson Lalenke, a human rights activist and journalist from Indonesia. Thank you for providing this vital platform to address the deep humanitarian crisis unfolding in the Kherson region and Donbass and others. As we review the devastating data, statistics, and heart-wrenching testimonies of civilians caught in the crossfire, we are forced to confront a brutal reality. Behind every strategic map and every piece of military hardware, real human lives are being systematically destroyed. The remote mining of public roads and the destruction of food, medicine, and emergency medical services are not just violation of international law, but are a failure of our shared humanity. This brings to mind the profound philosophical insight of the great Enlightenment thinker Immanuel Kant and his categorical imperative. Kant argued that we must always treat human beings as an end in themselves and never merely as a means to an end. In the theater of geopolitics, we have dangerously reversed this maxim. Human lives, both innocent civilians trying to survive in Kherson and the soldiers sent to the front lines, are being used as merely pawns and means to political and territorial ends. This is a moral values that no strategic victory can ever justify. Therefore, my presence today is not just to observe, but to issue an urgent, uncompromising call to action. We must look beyond the immediate rhetoric of blame and address an ultimate humanitarian necessity. The conflict must end. We must halt the machinery of violence immediately to stop the killing of human beings. Every single day the conflict persists, more families are shattered and more futures are erased on both sides. Let this international conference organized by the Russian Federation not just be a ledger of documented tragedies, but a definitive catalyst for a peaceful resolution. Let us prioritize the sanctity of human life above all else, silence the weapon, and pave the way for a rational diplomatic coexistence. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое. И
Thank you. And finally, I would like to give the floor to Mexico, Her Excellency Senator Yekol Polensky Gurvitz. She chairs the Committee of International Relations and Asian and Asia Pacific region. Thank you for your patience. We understand that was a long conference. We understand that we have an extensive list of speakers. If Her Excellency is still with us, we would like to give her the floor. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. I thank the Russian embassy in Mexico, and I welcome all experts that share their information for us to learn more about the grave situation caused by the crimes committed by the armed forces of Ukraine against Russian civilians. I express my condolences to all the victims and their families of this cruel war. I welcome all the participants of this important meeting. I would like to acknowledge the participation of the Brotherly Republic of Nicaragua. For us, it is difficult to realize that a large portion of civilians, including children, have been killed by the armed forces of Ukraine. We are appalled by the attacks on school, which killed 21 children. That was a heinous act of crime. Russia has always promoted multilateralism and respect for international law. We can only remember how the Soviet Union promoted the establishment of the United Nations in order to prevent the Third World War, which today threatens all of us. It is truly appalling to see that the Russian Federation deals with the EU, not only Ukraine, with NATO, with the US, who have decided to continue rearm the entire world. The United States have pledged to cut social spending in order to increase their defense spending because that's their goal. We need to understand that's their real goal so that no one would doubt it. 70 billion euros. 70 billion euros were sent to continue this war waged by the Kiev regime. NATO has no reason to exist today. When the Soviet Union collapsed and when the Warsaw Treaty collapsed, the NATO should have stopped its existence, but yet NATO continues to operate without pursuing any goal, without any having any sense in this existence, because I believe that we need to strongly condemn it. It is necessary for bloggers, journalists, social media influencers to tell what is really happening in US Congress, because what is really happening is inhumane, is cruel, is ruthless. It is painful to hear about the horrors of what the eyewitnesses faced with, what they told us when UAVs are used against civilians, when landmines are planted on regular roads to obstruct food and medicine supplies. It seems that it is not enough for the U.S. To impose a blockade against Cuba and Venezuela that is unable to protect itself today and is unable to deal with 2 earthquakes because they have no funds for that. U.S. wants to maintain this blockade and they provide weapons for that, and they want to reclaim their leading positions, but there is no sense in that because they do not have all the necessary technologies and capabilities. That's why they are waging wars all over the world, and that's not only the threat to Russia, it poses a threat to other countries. The attacks by the Kiev regime against Russian civilians constitutes a crime, and we need to make it clear for all other countries of the world that that's how the situation is developing today. That is the real situation. Because mass media in these countries are lying, they are deceiving, but they can work to make sure that their reports are heard all over the globe. Western media conceal crimes committed by the Kiev regime and Zelensky's regime. They spread propaganda to distort the reality and inflict damage on Russia. I would like to express my solidarity, and I would like to say that I feel the pain of the Russian Federation. I thank you for your support, and we need to develop a campaign, a strategy that will condemn and reveal what the US and EU are doing, that they have abandoned social security policies, that how Japan is rearming itself, although it has committed to never militarize itself. It is written in its constitution. But you see what Japan is doing in the Asia-Pacific region. Experiments with China. It shouldn't happen today. The production of Patriot weapons. It is the 3rd country in the world after Germany and Japan that is allowed to make these missiles, and that poses a global threat. We need to mobilize our forces. We need to raise our voice to make sure that innocent civilians are no longer killed because of the actions taken by Kiev. Because these actions are absolutely unjust and cruel. We need to promote multilateralism and develop strategies to let others know that we stand united, but we need to raise our voice to do that. Many countries say that there was a regime change. How the regime was changed, because only U.S. president can influence that decision, although he never consults anyone on that. Why no one is paying attention to what international organizations are saying? Why everyone is disregarding international law? Because we're talking about international agreements here. I believe that we need to stop, put an end to that, and to stop the suffering of civilians due to the actions taken by US and NATO, who strive to make profit from genocide and wars that they continue to provoke all over the globe. Again, I would like to express my solidarity on my personal behalf and on behalf of my colleagues. Our country has always advocated for peace and will never support such monstrous crimes from which the daily Russian Federation is suffering. Thank you for giving me the floor. Thank you, Madam Senator, for sending such a strong message for peace. It is especially relevant today when militarization trends, as you have aptly noted, are becoming global today. I think that all reasonable forces should unite together. Those forces who promote multilateral world order, those who promote the principles of sovereignty, principles of developing friendly relations in peaceful dispute settlement. I see that your signals are supported in the chat, and there were even reactions were made when you spoke, and many supported you. Thank you for making such a remarkable speech. Now I would like to give the floor to Moscow, to His Excellency Ambassador Miroshnik. I propose to end our discussion. There are still some participants who want to make their contributions, but probably we'll offer them to do that in the written form. I would like to kindly ask you to comment the question that was raised by our colleague from Paraguay. He also spoke about militarization of the Kiev regime. Thank you, Madam Zhdanova. I would like to thank our colleagues from Paraguay, Tajikistan, Paraguay, Myanmar, Indonesia, and Mexico. Thank you for saying these words, for sharing your comments and emotions. And thank you for sympathizing with persons who are suffering in the Kherson region. Answering the question raised by our colleague from Paraguay, I would like to say that attempts to present the attacks against civilian infrastructure and against civilians as legal ways of warfare are unacceptable. Geneva Conventions of the International Humanitarian Law say that means of warfare are limited. You cannot use weapons that lead to the death among civilians and to the destruction of civilian infrastructure and that create unbearable living conditions. These actions constitute crimes that today are committed by the Kiev regime that is supported and funded by Western countries. And that's what you mentioned, and that's what we have been talking about over the past hour. Thank you for understanding that. I think that we will be able to persist and we will be able to protect our infrastructure. We will learn how to protect our bridges, our oil refineries, places where civilian populations are located, and we are going to use a tool set of opportunities that is available. Today we're talking about civil defense, talking about increasing the capabilities of air defense systems and also the military response that would be used against Kiev. Kiev regime will collapse regardless of a number of weapons sent there, and they will be brought to justice for the crimes that they are committing.
I'd also like to express our gratitude to our colleague from Paraguay for his determination to see firsthand what's happening on Russian territories that are affected by the strikes of the Kiev terrorist regime. I'll make sure to share with my colleagues from the media this determination, his desire. Will find additional opportunities to ensure visits, field visits for journalists that are not afraid of visiting these developments, to visit these regions, because they want to see the situation in the Donbas region, in Crimea, alongside the whole contact line. We'll talk with colleagues and find chances to implement your plans, desires. I think it's very valuable and important. In closing, I'd like to express my gratitude, and I think the baseline of our 3-hour work is that we have made a huge step forward to overcome censorship and a ban to spread truth. Together with you, we are moving in this direction, and I hope that thanks to you, the information about all these developments will spread. And I'd like to thank you for that. We intend to continue our operations activities and to do similar things if they are in demand and if they lead to a positive effect that we felt from you today, because your participation is highly valuable for us. Your comments are valuable, and your further action at your platforms where you're present in your countries is or will be assessed by our country as an opportunity to communicate truth and to spread truthful information about Kiev violating IHL. Thank you very much. We understand that it is not in vain that we've doing our job. We'll continue. Thank you very much for your attention and your participation. Thank you very much, Mr. Miroshnik. I'd like to say a couple of words with regard to the question from our colleague from Paraguay as far as the supplies of weapons to the Kiev regime go. You know, the response can be only the following. The militarization of the Kiev regime is inevitable. Our defense ministry focuses on all military facilities, the facilities of military industrial complex, as well as joint EU-Ukraine enterprises manufacturing armaments and military equipment for the needs of the Ukrainian regime that are located beyond Ukraine. Recently, the Ministry of Defense has published a table representing software used for the terrorist activities of the Kiev regime. I'd like to highlight once again that our servicemen are monitoring it in detail, and the prospects of further escalation only depend on the actions of the West. As of now, I'd like to move to my final remarks. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, today the international community has for the first time verified and systematized data linked with criminal activities by the Kiev regime headed by Zelensky against the civilian population of the Kherson region of the Russian Federation. It has been highlighted today that one of the reasons why we have organized today's event is that we are dealing with information campaign of the West to justify all the criminal activities by the Kiev regime. Kiev and its European sponsors are striving to demonstrate that the terror against the civilian population, war crimes that we've talked about today, constitute a norm. However, it is not. Basic principles of IHL cannot be ignored, and we will be doing everything to advocate this position. At the same time, European states continue to militarily and politically support the Kiev regime. They will have to realize that supplying the Kiev regime with military purpose goods is not an accomplishment, it's not something to be proud of. It's an act of crime. They bear the responsibility for the continuing bloodshed among the civilians, and they're responsible for the creation of obstacles on the path towards the settlement. The range of problems that we've outlined should be made focus of international organizations. As of now, they continue to mechanically retransmit unsubstantiated accusations against Russia, and they ignore the crimes of the Kiev regime. Within today's event, we've granted the opportunity to talk for the residents of the Kherson region who have gone through these events firsthand. This is a clash with reality that humanitarian organizations just can't ignore. We hope that the eyewitness accounts presented today will be taken into account by international organizations, the representatives of which have been present today. It is important to understand that nothing inspires the perpetrator more than the justification of his deed. That's what Mr. Miroshnik talked about during his briefing at the Russian Foreign Ministry last week. On behalf of the delegation of the Russian Federation to the Vienna Negotiations on Military Security and Arms Control, and on behalf of Ambassador at Large Rodion Miroshnik, I'd like to express our speakers, participants, organizers for their active contribution into our discussion. It is true that our event has been going on for 3 hours now. We are grateful to the residents of the Kherson region for their bravery and their help in spreading the truth, communicating the truth to the international community. We're deeply thankful to Russian foreign missions and representatives of Rossотрудничества across the world for the contribution. I'd like to give a special thanks to our interpreters that have made this possible in English, Spanish, French, and Serbian. I'd like to deeply thank Russia Today and Tauria. I'd like to thank the professional team of Mr. Miroshnik for co-organizing this event. I'd like to also express my gratitude to my team of the delegation in Vienna. By this, I declare the 5th International Video Conference on AFU Crimes Against Civilian Population is closed. Thank you very much, and I'll see you.